These in there. A contemporary of Martin Luther. Indeed, an antagonistic contemporary. The way it turned out, Martin never wanted it to be that way. He always wanted to work within the church, but a contemporary of his would be Pope Leo X. 172,000 days. Compared to Martin Luther's what? 4 million. Let's throw some others in there. We all know about John Huss. Actually, John Huss himself was 100 years before Martin Luther, and you know the story about John Huss. I found 160,000 hits of John Huss. How about John Wycliffe? We need the John Wycliffe if we're going to study about the Reformation. 234,000 hits. How about the famous John Calvin? The famous John Calvin. We're going to talk about him too. 1,290,000 hits. How about the John of a more modern era, John Wesley? Look at all the Johns there. Lots of important religious leaders have the name John. Isn't that interesting? John Wesley gives 3,300,000 hits. Isn't that interesting? If you know the history of John Wesley and where that all went and his Reformation, I thought I'd throw in Ulrich Zwingli. Well, Zwingli gets 171,000 hits. How about William Tyndale? 207,000 hits. And someone else who liked the name John chose this name for himself. John Paul the 23rd. He gets 1,100,000 hits. But you know, of the religious leaders that I purposely put in here, you know who gets the most hits of all?
John Lennon.
Billy Graham. 7,070,000 hits on Billy Graham. Important people who had an influence on their lives, some of them in a very positive way, maybe some of them in a negative way. But today we're going to look at the one who probably had the most effect on the Christian church, on Christianity, and that's Martin Luther. He was born on November 10th, 1483, in Eisleben, his birthplace. They have reconstructed his birth house there, and there is a picture of his mother and his father. And Martin himself was the oldest of several brothers and sisters. He had lots of, Martins had lots of children. Now I'm going to be sharing some history with you today that contradicts some of the tradition that's handed down, because today we know more information. One of the traditions that's been handed down, which you'll find written in some books, including some of our own books, is the fact that the Luthers were poor and penniless. Just exactly the opposite is true. 3 leases of copper mines were owned by Martin Luther's father. Also, in those days, a poor peasant would never be able to afford a portrait made of themselves.